I'd like to welcome everyone to the Academy of the Impossible and our bi-weekly campaign school, which was started largely to increase participation in the political process in all possible manners. So not just for people who want to run for public office, but people who are interested in behind-the-scenes work, people who are interested in advocacy issues, people who want to be pundits and just want to participate rhetorically in the political process. Really, we try to accommodate all of that. We record and upload these sessions onto YouTube so that they provide a resource not just for people in the room, but for other people in society who are interested also in getting involved in the process. And we're really fortunate this week to have Councillor Shelley Carroll, who is someone I think has done a lot of work in trying to get young people involved in politics and in city council, and really has a lot of experience on the municipal level. I mean, there isn't both sides of the floor as there is in Parliament, but if there were, certainly you've both experienced from the budget chief what it's like inside power, and now the kind of farce that is City Hall, and not necessarily, and perhaps for very good reasons, not being part of the corridors of power. So here's a microphone, again, not so much for those present, but for those who aren't present. I'm pretty sure it's on. Yes.
It is already on.
And it's really meant to be very informal, so don't feel...
informal, but being taped for you.
Yes, on the record. As certainly as someone who works...
Your first lesson in politics.
Yes, there is no off the record.
My whole deal.
Yes. But I mean, it's you were on actually Metro Morning on Friday, sort of as a bit of a preview, talking about how you got into politics, and you mentioned Mike Harris as a kind of provocative way of realizing that you can't really leave public service to people who just want to destroy, that you need to have people who actually want to create, who actually want to use public office to make it a better life. So I almost want to start in the present. Do you think that Rob Ford is perhaps doing that in Toronto, that he's having a similar catalyst where people are realizing that they can't be complacent, that they can't just vote once every 4 years, that they have to really get involved in municipal politics in a very tangible level?
And that was a rhetorical question. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. When I was engaged in the opposition to Mike Harris as a parent activist, we often sat around a room and said, it's either the end of public education as we know it, or we're in this fight, eventually we'll win, and we are creating a generation of the best parents that will ever be, because they know what they can lose if they're not engaged. I think it's part of what's going on over there now. I know there are flaws, there are probably times you're frustrated in your child's school, but there are exciting little things that go on. They don't grab headlines. Progressives are bad at putting things in the headlines when they get something right. But there's a little thing called model schools going on there. And in every school where there's a model school and there's extra funds, it engages whole families. And there was a time when you couldn't spend enough money to engage parents, and they still wouldn't come. But I've been to visit a number of them, and it's actually working. You hand $1 million to a principal, and a whole family model is happening. But the parents in those model schools, they're inner city, and so they tend to be younger age parents. One of them is my daughter. And so I go to visit, and I've never seen such engagement. Well, she's year one of the Mike Harris secondary school curriculum. She's year one of job actions, and crap, I might not even get this diploma because they're still out on the sidewalk, and it's not even a strike, it's a job action, and what the hell is that? Kids experience that, and some of them are very young parents, but man, are they ever good parents? Are they ever engaged parents? And are they ever politically hooked up? And some of them coming from family backgrounds where that wouldn't have been assumed. But a principal can almost assume that if she does the right thing, she will engage that parent.
Well, and one of our recurring themes here at Campaign School is asking our guests when their politicization occurred. And it strikes me that you have a very well-rounded view on the political process, that you're not someone who sort of thinks there's one way and only that way, that you understand both the consensus building and just the broader dynamics of it. So I'm curious, in terms of going back into the earlier parts of your life, even way before you went into public office, what was it that allowed you to realize that you wanted to be involved, that you wanted to, at the very least, start paying attention to politics?
Oh, I think this will sound corny. At a really, really early age, I started to realize I wanted to have the big conversation and not the little conversation. I grew up in a house full of women, 3 sisters, and including the fact that my dad traveled a lot. So sometimes it was truly a house full of women. And we had, once a week, we had a dinner night where the kids were allowed to control the conversation. And eventually we got to adolescence and we would fight about what that conversation would be about. So it became, I'm designating it, tonight is Wendy's night, tonight is Susan's night, tonight is Shelley's night. And both the Wendy and Susan nights were about getting some conflict mediation for a fight they had over a package of gum in the morning, and we want to talk about that right now, and Mom and Dad are going to weigh in on this and solve it. And then the third week would come, and the youngest member of the family would say, can we talk about this Roe versus Wade thing that I heard about on television, but I didn't really understand some of the big words, and would want to be talking about social justice things just because it attracted me in the early days of Phil Donahue and talk television before there was talk radio. So I just had a tendency to want to look at the big issues instead of the little personal ones. And that became really obvious to me upon becoming a parent, because you could run yourself ragged solving little issues for your kids. I have a child with special needs, and I could zero in on that and become one of those many. There's a whole population of strong, amazing, dynamic parents engaged in rights for children with autism. But because I had that big picture tendency, my concern was, is the world going to be good to people with autism? Not just what will happen for those very specific services, but if I'm heading for inclusion, if I want this kid in the classroom, if I want him to be able to ride the TTC, if I want him to be able to go to the job, is there a compassionate world waiting for this kid? So that means you don't become a special education advocate. It means you start working for a better world. And that sort of came along with parenthood. I don't think that everyone in politics has to be a parent, but if you have a few of those that are always they're always looking at those sorts of broader perspectives, it will help us. You then always have the option of saying, what should I do about this? Okay, well, I need some way to try and understand it. Can I link it to something in my personal life so I can understand what we need to do for this big issue? Well, what's the end result of doing something like this for Martha? And it works in every realm of municipal politics, because municipal politics is so directly linked to your life. I can say, well, is Martha going to be able to get employment out of this? The last time I was on this street was to go to where Ubisoft is moving in. Mm-hmm. Could she work here? This is awesome. This is what they said, knowledge economy, creative city, and here it is happening in this brick building. But if I can employ Martha that way, then there must be thousands of other youth flowing through the same academic programs and headed for that building. I must be on the right track. So I use the personal and the broad picture interchanged. Well,
and it strikes me that appreciation or that desire for the bigger picture is a key ingredient in surviving the often pettiness of municipal politics. That on the one hand, it's very tangible, it's very real. It's why I think it's the most accessible for people, because it connects to their lives in a more immediate way.
Yeah.
But too often you do get politicians who can't see the big picture, who can get very petty in terms of their own politicking. How do you not get depressed? How do you not get discouraged and maintain that bigger picture?
Well, you don't get depressed, and this is, people think that you know, coalitions and factions in council are born out of some evil agenda. Sometimes they're born out of, oh, that is so frustrating, and it does get depressing unless the people that I feel a camaraderie with, the people I know have similar politics to me, unless we just go and have a drink when that crazy day was over. And I will admit that that's where the pettiness happens. No, you have to blow off steam, so you go out with those people that you feel some connection to, and before you know it, you're strategizing. And it wasn't that you had an evil agenda to start out finding those people, but you take the people with whom you have something in common, and ideas begin to form. And if there's agreement, then you think, what now is possible? Because, you know, here we are at the Academy of the Impossible talking about politics, the art of the possible, but that's what happens. Next thing you know, you're strategizing, how could we bring this forward? Right now, we're living in a political world where the conversation is, how can we stop this thing from happening? We're at a tipping point now, though. We've had a couple of victories stopping bad things from happening. My own view is that very soon we better make some good things happen, that same coalition, or we're done as a coalition. Because you know, we had something in common in that we all disagreed with something. If we don't find out what those 25 people agree on and try and make a wonderful thing happen, we're all just going to fall back into our usual groups of friends. Because certainly, she won't mind my saying this, Councillor Stintz and I we don't head to the bar together at the end of a council session. We don't have a lot in common. We have some disagreements in approaches to the city, even if we're thinking about it in a family-based way. But we're fundamentally agreeing on things in terms of transit. I got to quickly find out, what else do we agree on? What can we go forward with? Because there's Karen over there, me and a few other people here, and these people in between, looking at what's possible if those two extremes come with us. We got to find it.
Well, and obviously I do want to spend time today talking about campaigning on a very micro level, like on a door knocking level. But sure. I think just on that point, it brings up the campaigning that occurs between elections. That's not just about constituency relationship, but that coalition building and the type of network building. To what extent do you feel that that's becoming more transparent, more open? And it goes back to how citizens are becoming more engaged between elections. And it was, you know, on the mayor's radio show today, I felt it was just a campaign. He's just trying to get people to call their city councillors. Indeed. To what extent do you feel that this new opportunity on council, for council to actually assert its legal power over someone who's trying to almost defy the rules of council, to what extent is that a campaign, and a campaign that requires both popular support but also colleague and peer support?
Oh, it's always a campaign with our current fearless leader. It never stops being a campaign, which is, it's extraordinary really, because we have a 4-year term. Could we not have a work period in the middle? Well, some of us would like to. Really, that's me being extremely politically naive, and I sometimes am. Rob Ford is part of that group of politicians that never stops campaigning, never stops messaging. It's never about the work. It's not even really, in my view, and he'll get very upset to hear me say this, but I don't even think it's about the city, the real city with real people in it. This is a political game, and he must win every day. Not just on election day. He wants to win every day. With good messaging, even the ones you lose, you can win.
Especially if you defy reality.
We spent a month and a half getting to the point where we would win that budget vote. And when it was done, his immediate message was that we are the tax and spend idiots who just ruined everything. We didn't ruin much. We saved 100 jobs. He cut 1,200. So we didn't win much. But it took so much work, and it was a potentially headline-grabbing thing that we made a tiny $15 million tinkering motion to his $10 billion budget. But he won the message war. Wow, did he ever? He convinced you that the budget was smaller than any budget he's ever had. And his messaging is so effective that I could explain to you why it's not, and why he literally pulled numbers out of the budget to make it look smaller. But that's me explaining. And while I was explaining, he was messaging, kick-ass messaging. And in the end, he won. The transit special meeting. We slogged our guts out to get to the point where we had a most uncommon coalition of votes to finally get the transit plan that every engineer in the world agreed was good for Toronto, and actually put it through council, got the special meeting, got the vote through, and at the end of the day, while we were explaining what we had just done, he ran upstairs, stood in front of a microphone and said, "Council is irrelevant." And what do we remember about that night? If we went out on the street and took a poll, what do you remember that night? That was so well covered by even pundits who were mad at him for saying that, but it was so covered that he said that. That's the most memorable thing about that night, that Rob Ford called council irrelevant. He wins.
It sort of brings up the question, I think, a lot of outsiders who may be flirting with the idea of getting involved in politics. Perhaps this is what stumps them. And I'll ask the question out of context, because I think it's more prevalent in America than it is in Canada, but it's happening more and more. What do you do when your opponent lies? I mean, what do you do if you're someone who's getting involved in politics for moral reasons, for ethical reasons, and your opponent, even if your opponent believes what they're lying, so to them it's not a lie because they really believe it, but we are seeing a reduction in evidence-based politicking in many instances. How do you deal with that without being further discouraged or depressed?
Well, we need to deal with it more effectively than we have been. David Miller was taken down by an extraordinary string of lies. An extraordinary string of lies. He made a whole bunch of things better, but he was really bad at messaging. He really was. And I've told him to his face, so if this shows up on YouTube. He actually did get rid of, we made it voluntary to end the strike, but he actually did get rid of the legendary sick bank, reduced unfunded liability by $400 million, which is good news to me. He also negotiated the lowest contract increase for any public sector union in 11 years. And you think he gave away the store? Because there are messengers in the political scene in this city right now who only do messaging. That's all they do. They're just there. That guy's the guy I want taken down, and I got a group of people who want him taken down, and we're going to craft the messaging. They don't explain, and they don't tell you what they're for. They're about messaging. We have to learn that. It's what some of us are trying to do now, but it's something that progressives balk at and are afraid of, by and large, because it seems like that's going to lead you down the same path and you'll be lying. And I'm not saying messaging meaning lying. I'm saying instead of explaining in a way that makes some segments of the population fall asleep and other segments of the population disengage because, oh, you just said something about quorum and special meetings and the clerk saying that you would have to have a 2/3 majority because the procedural bylaw, I'm going to turn the channel now. Who the hell cares? But if I say to you, here's a guy who has one vision: smaller government, lower taxes, smaller government, lower taxes. I can explain to you all the ways I want to do it, but will you just come with me? Are you with me? Will you get on my bus if what I'm promising you is a stronger city, broader prosperity, and a better future? That is my vision. I'm not lying. I'm not lying. Stronger city, broader prosperity, better future. That's messaging.
That sounds good.
But that is who I am. That's who I am, and everything I ever have done and everything I will do in the city, you can say has to do with those three things. That is Shelley Carroll. And I didn't lie to you just now, but I also didn't make you fall asleep. And some of you actually leaned forward when I leaned forward. And all of you, everyone in this room, because I slowed down and I got a little quieter, all of you started to actually physically alter your breathing in case you missed something. That's what's
well,
yeah, and you guys were just listening on the radio before I got here. Was he explaining the life of a mayor, or was he messaging?
He was messaging.
They're messaging their asses off day in and day out. They're paying people really good money to teach them how to do it. So my view is that in the city of Toronto, the progressive community has got to stop fearing messaging and learn how to do it.
Well, it's interesting, I think, that there is a kind of apprehension to leave one's comfort zone. And progressives, I think, often that extends to the preaching to the choir idea, that many are stuck in saying the types of communications that don't get to that larger audience. But that allows me to come back to what I think you've almost done the opposite of what most people do, where there is such disrespect for public service that most people get into public service, say, forget about it, and go to the private sector, whereas you actually started in the private sector. And then, you know, as you say, perhaps for that motivation of being concerned for the bigger picture, then went into the public sector. So I'm curious, what was the most surprising thing? What was the biggest shock in that transition that you did not anticipate, that was, you know, a real, I don't want to say a blind spot, because it's not a negative, but just, you know, what is it that you could convey to people who might be going through a similar transition? What would be that one piece of advice for, you know, get ready for this, because I wasn't, and I wish someone had told me?
Well, I wish someone had told me how broke I'd be for so many, many years. Well, and that was the decision. The decision was, you know, we could keep going. We could have a Royal Bank staff rate on a mortgage and just keep plugging away at this. But the issues were just piling up that you just never had time to deal with. And I really did get to a point where it was a question of, am I going to be able to live with myself at the end of this? I'm here because I'll get a 3% rate on a Visa card, and I'll get a prime -1 mortgage rate. And we're talking about the late 70s here. So some people in the room will remember that interest rates were things like 17% at that point. But we also had this feeling that at the end of the day, both my husband and I were saying, you know, how are we going to feel at the end of this? And I was mulling it over and mulling it over. And then one day, I was sitting at my desk in the morning. It was still in the branch. In the morning, I'm going over loans reports. I was doing my loans officer training then and investment stuff and checking all the business current account balance of people that I was worried about their businesses. The other thing that happened in the late 70s is a whole bunch of restaurants opened and shut within 12 months. It was a very rough time. So it wasn't exactly cheery in the bank, but I was sitting going through that activity register, and my card file is right beside my desk, and a university student who came and worked for us every 4 months in the branch I was in down on University Avenue came, and he's looking something up in the card file, and suddenly his eyes wandered to my bag was open beside the desk between us. And he said, no word of a lie, he saw a copy of Flaubert's Sentimental Education, which is what I was reading. And he reached down, he picked it up, and he held it in his hand, and he looked at me, and he said, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm on the activity register. It'll be done in about 5 minutes. He said, no, Shelley, what are you doing? And he waved the book in my hand. And I thought, I think it's kind of time to go. What am I doing in the bank? There's a lot of really important things to do, and I'm not going to do them sitting in this branch. And I looked up, and there's 30 people there that are actually deliriously happy doing those things. So it's not like this bank will fall apart if I walk away. I was actually trying to fit social justice into my job, which meant that some of those restaurants, I was given an extra month or two because I really wanted them to make it, which means I might find ways to live with myself that would make me a really bad loans officer for the Royal Bank. I needed to go out into the field where you could actually make those things work. Yeah.
And one of the reasons I asked that question was Andrew Cash, our Member of Parliament, when he was here, he actually admitted that door knocking, that canvassing was something that he underestimated how central and how important it is in terms of...
Does he love it?
He does. It was a story of conversion,
awesome. Yeah.
but it was one of him saying of how much he underestimated, especially as a musician and a journalist, of exactly what was involved. And I think, too, for young people, there is a bit of a myth that social media is replacing that, when in fact it's not, when there is still a need to have that tangible connection with your constituents. I'm curious to both, A, hear about your first experiences in canvassing and what that was like, but also the type of energy that you get from it and why you think it's so important in terms of staying connected, almost in real time, to appropriate a social media phrase, in terms of being a representative politician.
Well, first of all, you have to get energy from it. If you don't come back from every canvass pumped, then you are in the wrong business. And that goes for anybody who's planning to be in it as a staffer as well. Anybody who wants to get heavily involved in politics in any way, you know that at some point it's all hands to the pumps. So you'd better really derive energy from it. I really do. I always return to the campaign office. Dun, da, da, da. We did, we've done Wallace today, whatever the street is. We got X number of signs, and then the thing that drives all of my staff crazy, I always have to stop and tell 6 stories from that street. I love to tell the story. But you get the story of the neighborhood, and you arrive back at City Hall or whatever office it is, just good to go. I have knocked on 30,000 doors in the last 4 months. I know of which I speak, da 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 da. And so it shouldn't come as any surprise that there's some real combative stuff going on at the beginning, because we pull from the door the things we need to support the things we believe, and we go out convincing people those things we believe, and then you get back and Councillor X says, well, I went to the door too, and blee, blee, blue, blue, blah, blah, and then the fight is on. So there is a sort of storming year one. I don't know how they got through that. They would have had to do it in a number of weeks back in the day when a municipal term of office was 1 year. She would have to have gone through that phase of, well, here's what I heard, damn it, and then get on with work. I don't know how they function. I don't know how they get anything done at all, but they did somehow. But that's been happening surely for the first 6 months. It was nothing but that. And some of us had strange races. But you also had better love the door if you're going to be involved in any other way. And for me, going to the door started long before my own campaign. A school board trustee campaign is a horrible, thankless task. There's no tax advantage, no rebate, no nothing. So you have no funds. The door is the only way you're going to win. You're lucky if you can pull together enough money for a small handful of signs, unless you're someone who's really just using it as a stepping stone and is very, very well to do. That's not who we want in trustee campaigns. And so, I hope that over time people begin to understand that those types of campaigns really need lots and lots of grassroots support. But before doing my own campaign, because I began to know back in like 1992, 93, I started to realize things are changing in this city. I may get involved. I may have to get involved. Then you start to get involved in campaigns wherever you can. Eventually, I was just a regular on the campaign in my area, which was for David Kaplan when he was running for MPP. And wow, is that ever a campaign machine? My husband always jokes, the T-shirt, WWJD, what would Jesus do? My husband has a T-shirt that says WWWD, what would Wilf do? And by that I mean Wilf Kaplan, the husband of Eleanor Kaplan and father of David Kaplan. It's a family campaign machine, and they understand every component of it. And they understand that you have supporters for life if everyone who gets involved in the campaign gets to do everything. Then they're hooked on the drug of the excitement of a campaign. So I was lucky enough to be a part of that. 1999, when we thought we were taking down Premier Harris but didn't quite make it, we processed 800 volunteers a week through our campaign office. Most campaigns at the municipal level, you're lucky if you see 30 to 50 people coming to help through that week. 800 people a week. We had teachers driving in from Peterborough after school as fast as they could so they could canvass with us at 6 o'clock because we were running against the education minister in the Harris regime. That was one exciting campaign, and it was run by incredibly young people. I was a young mother, and yet I was one of the oldest people in it. Most of them most of the campaign management in it were in their mid-20s. And so it was very exciting, but I had learned every job I was now going to have to ask other people to do for me. And if you've done them, you know you can come back from a canvas and tell very quickly if they're getting her done, because you've done it and you know what it should look like by 9 o'clock at night. That was just invaluable. Yeah.
And could you elaborate a bit on the relationship that you as a candidate have with volunteers? The way that, I mean, they're volunteering for you, so there's certainly a type of reciprocity, at least emotionally and politically, that you have to give them. But how do you sort of translate those weak social ties into strong social ties? That person who comes into the campaign office just out of curiosity, how do you get them to put in the hours to come canvassing with you?
Well, you have to make sure that if you're starting and it's your first campaign for yourself ever, probably the people around you, the staffers, are either going to be your best friends or relatives. You're going to start out in a low-budget way. It's important because you're at the door that you make sure that everyone that's working for you realizes that they're an extension of you now, and they've got to make sure that every volunteer feels the love, because you're going to be out there. If you're going to doors and the volunteers that go with you, they've now become not just people holding a clipboard. They're canvas managers and body persons and really important people, and you have to have fun with them while you're there. So the people who go out to canvas, which is always considered, oh, can't I just stay in the office? You want it to be really fun. I'm going out. I'm hitting the street with Shelley. That has to be more fun than staying behind and doing data entry with your ass in a seat. It's got to be. And so you work on making sure the volunteers that hit the street with you are feeling the love. But back at the ranch, if your campaign manager and your office manager are engaged in a fight they've been having for 4 days now, everybody who's sitting around licking envelopes has had enough. They're not coming back tomorrow. They don't want to listen to that. They're done with that. They got involved in this to be excited, and so you've got to keep it up. They also may have gotten involved because one thing about Shelley made them twig, but while they're in the office, do they leave knowing more? If I'm not there telling stories, can somebody else tell some stories? And create this legend of what we've done and where we're going and what you are now part of. So that they're not only going to come back tomorrow, they are your campaign worker for life. Because if you get into politics, each campaign better have more bodies at it than the last. And what's even more exciting, if you really give them the jazz in a campaign, what do they do between campaigns? How valuable are they in the community now? Whatever value it is you're trying to instill in the community, whatever goals you have for that community, they're now going to be espousing them for the next 4 years, and they're going to be saying that in the Tim Hortons line. Not stay the course, Robbie, but things like, actually, can I interrupt there? You know, if at the end of my campaign there's a 19-year-old that's going to take on the guy who's saying the bus driver should make $11 an hour, okay, job done. I programmed that kid, and they are now an ambassador who is helping me make stronger city, broader prosperity, better future.
Well, and elaborate. And I mean, I've got maybe one or two more questions, and would certainly invite anyone who'd like to ask their own or provide a similar context or case example to get the councillor's learned perspective on. By all means, there's a microphone there that's open to anyone. And, you know, elaborating on that point of the legend, right, or the myth, what role does media play? And especially for a rookie candidate who is maybe an underdog, who's maybe going up an incumbent, should you ignore the media because they'll ignore you, or is it worth trying to find a way to get out there, to have at least your profile, if not your voice and your platform, get further exposure?
Oh, very definitely. There's no question. When I got elected to the school board, it was only the second term of the TDSB, but I actually put in my literature, I am the first citizen of the new city of Toronto to unseat an incumbent. Well, that's true. It was partly due to the fact that there'd been a boundary realigning, so that really two trustees took in that area. One stepped down, the other one stayed in the race, but I had a lock on the part that he hadn't represented before. But I did unseat him, and media had a big part in that. First of all, I created my own media. I had for 2 years been writing a thing called the Board Watch, which today would be a blog. But in those days was me slogging my guts out, writing 16 pages of copy on every meeting that had taken place in every room on the school board on a monthly basis. And then a great professor from York University, George Martel, editing it for me. And then me actually pasting it into envelopes, that one for the shop steward in the school, one for the federation president, one for the parent council, and one for the principal. And then actually getting it shipped out to all the schools in hard copy. That was insane. And we did it all for no money. Nobody paid us to do it. So I created my own media. Today it would be a blog, but every letter has to be written knowing that one day if I'm a politician, I don't want any of this coming back to bite me. Yes. And that's a careful dance that many of us are not remembering on Facebook on a day-to-day basis. If there is anyone in this room, if you are running for office, go home and clean your Facebook page up right now, damn it. If you're coming to apply for a job with Shelley Carroll, when you leave, I'm going to check your page. So erase that stuff now. I don't want to know what you look like on Saturday night. So you want to clean up that stuff. I'm sorry, I thought I'd turned my ringer off. But you also want to get in the mainstream media. And so getting involved in causes, again, you got to be really careful about how you get involved in it and what you're saying and whether or not you look like a person who, I disagree with this, but given the chance, what would I be doing, and would I be a person who could govern? Because you can't just run by saying, that guy's a crook. You have to be able to say, and if I was there, here's how I would be governing. And so, you know, laced into each cause and getting rid of him was not just that man's trying to destroy education as we know it. So what should be happening? What do we know? What do the experts say? And how can I say it in a compelling way? And it was good to do that because the media was looking for that in those days. We don't want to just say, you know, they're having the same problem now. We don't want to say every day, Rob is psycho, and sign off on it. Eventually their editors are going to get tired of that. So if you can give them more meat to the matter, flesh out the story, you become the activist in this difficult situation that gets into that mainstream media. You know, when we had the 24-hour meeting of deputations, they didn't write endless quotes of the councillors. They wrote the most compelling people. It's that young 14-year-old woman in Scarborough who came and spoke at 3 in the morning about libraries and made everyone in the room cry. Is she going to run for office one day? I sure as hell hope so. And when she does, she can put all those clippings into her lit. Because didn't we all speak of her in glowing terms? You got to be thinking when you're publicly speaking or contacting media, is this a clipping I want in my file later on?
So we've got a question. Go ahead.
Hi. So I guess I've kind of got two questions, and I suppose now just because you brought up this whole Facebook thing, and I don't know. I suppose I have a bad habit of talking about like really from the heart about my feelings about certain politicians. Anyway, but I'll go back to that after. I actually would like to eventually, perhaps run. I think that I've done a lot of community work. I've got like a proper education in political economics and business and all this, but I'm not wealthy,
Yeah.
And I don't really come from a wealthy family, you could say. I mean, depends how my aunts maybe, but.
Yeah. They can each give you $750.
Yeah, they can. Is that it?
Yeah.
But I heard, I guess my point is that I've heard that from, like, I've spoken to several councillors. Like, I talked to Josh Matlow. I mean, I've done some work with him and some other councillors as well. And he was telling me, actually, specifically, Josh, I mean, I think it was him, that you need like $40,000 to run a successful campaign. If you want to get elected to council, you need $40,000 minimum. 40. I don't have $40,000 just lying around, and I'm not willing to take a loan out, to be honest with you. Because what if I lose? And
You don't have to. I never have.
Yeah.
But if you are uncomfortable asking your aunt for money, then you're in big trouble. Because you have to ask a lot of people for a lot of money. I've never taken out a loan.
Yeah. Right.
I can't. I don't have that much money to begin with. I suppose I could put my house up. I may have to do that if I'm ever running for anything bigger.
That's a loan, though.
But I've never done it before. But what you do have to do is be comfortable asking for money. And big money, not, well, as little as $25, you'll still get a rebate of $17. If I have to pull together $40,000 on $25 donations, I'm dead in the water. You got to be able to say, to really make a difference, to get there fast, it's got to be 100, and make a list of the people who can give you the max. That's 750, and be comfortable asking it. I get in trouble saying this every time, but in my view, a big part of why women have trouble making it into politics, they're getting better at it, but a big part of what the struggle has been for so long, and communities of diversity, is discomfort about asking for money. It's hard, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I suppose. But the other thing is, are you allowed to somehow ask for money in advance? I mean, like, let's say, I mean, we know that there's
January 1st of election year. The election doesn't come till the end of October, and there's always a lineup on January 1st. If you think you're going to have a hard time raising money, then you want to register early in the year, because the minute the year starts, you can start raising money. You know what's an even more fun way of raising money?
Yeah.
What if we flipped our campaign finances so that you could raise $40,000 with $25? Things get really honest really fast. When they needed to clean up dirty elections in New York City, they flipped it. You got to ask everybody for $100, and that gives you $100 on your campaign. Don't worry, you'll say to them, you're going to get a rebate. You're going to get $75. You get it about 18 months later when everybody's put their returns in. So right off the bat, you've really excluded those people in the community who'd like to help you, but they can't wait 18 months to get their $75 back. What about, instead of a rebate system, what if you had a grant system? What's your first name?
John.
So what if John has a bowl-a-thon tomorrow night and it's just $25 to get in, and 100 of his friends, all of them are just broke-ass people, but they bring their 25 bucks. And John takes all of those checks and he puts down all the information, and he has that bowl-a-thon sometime in February, and on the last day of February he goes down to the clerk's office and he takes all the information on all the people who gave him a $25 check, and the clerk adds them all up and tops it up $75 per donation, and she makes it 100.
Isn't it 6-1 in New York City or something ridiculous?
That's called well, it depends on the amount. But it's roughly the same as our ratio.
And it certainly makes the process more accessible for people who don't have the types of money for the big
See
donation.
what we did, John's having trouble picturing how he's going to make the 40 grand, and Josh had a hard time.
How much do I personally, like, what I really want to know is, I mean, I can get all this money donated. How much do I personally need to start with before I even start getting these donations in? Like, what's,
you start with zero, but you need $100 to register.
Right.
And you can decide you're not going to put anything in.
Realistically, start with zero? I mean, honestly. Like,
realistically, you can start with zero.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah.
I just want to, because I considered running carefully in the last election and did a lot of this research and whatnot. And actually, for me, the idea of fundraising the money that you need to spend was not actually that big of a mental obstacle, because I figured if I can't get people to actually give me money, then I'm not going to be able to get them to work for my campaign. I'm not going to be able to get them to support my agenda. If I can't ask them for $10, $25, $100 and raise that money, then I'm not going to be able to build a consensus anyway. But beyond that, the bigger issue for me, and this is what I'd like to hear a bit about, was actually, in terms of what you start with, is that if you're going to be serious about running, you may not need to put a single dollar of your own money into signs and office rent and all of that, but you're not going to be paying yourself a salary to campaign, and you're not going to be campaigning part-time on evenings and weekends if you're serious. So this is a supplement to your question, is sort of how much do you have to save up, or how do you organize it so that you can actually take 6 months or 3 months or whatever and just work full-time on your campaign?
That's very true. That is the one thing that is the huge sacrifice, because at the municipal level, it's full-time or you lose. Because for starters, the incumbent is going to be going full-time. We have 1 or 2 council sessions in the hardest part of the campaign, but we actually start to gear down the cycle of meetings so that we are full-time, and I will hit 30,000 doors. So you got to do the same. So that is the biggest investment, is the leave of absence. But here's the thing. If that's the case, then why weren't there, an unusually why weren't we overrepresented in terms of women a long time ago at the municipal level, when women weren't even working? Why weren't there a whole bunch of affluent middle-class women populating council? There should have been, but they're afraid to ask for money, and you still need the money. So now, one of the reasons that people make the little step by going into the school board, because it's a part-time job, a lot of people get into politics through school board first, not just because it's the first rung, but because you can do that job part-time. You really are a trustee. You're not expected to be there full-time, the evenings or evening. So you can say to your employer, I need a leave of absence. I need to win this for our community. I got to give it my best. So I need a leave of absence to campaign. If I win, I can keep this job and be a trustee. It's geared that way. Usually about 2/3 of the school board are people who have day jobs. So it's one of the reasons it becomes a stepping stone. I have a personal bone to pick, though. If it's only a stepping stone, if you don't actually have any interest in children, if you don't want to take phone calls until 11 o'clock at night about, I'm really upset that my daughter didn't get into French immersion at Broadlands, and I want you to go up there and bend every rule in the world to make that happen, or I'm going to come and kill you in the night. If you don't want to take those calls, then don't get into it. Have some passion about finding some way to fix that systemic flaw. But that is one where you can get in, and most employers are very responsive to it. Asking for a leave of absence for a job that you're not going to come back to is very difficult. It's why you see what you do see overrepresented in municipal councils all across the country. When we go to a Federation of Canadian Municipalities, you realize how many guys in this room packaged out at the age of about 58 and thought, well, I'll go sit on city council till I can't understand what they're saying anymore. We got to change that in this country. It's part of the reason that there is no real urban strategy for the whole nation. We've got a whole bunch of people sitting in those chairs in council chambers all across the country who devalue the role of government at the municipal level, even as they are the people acting it out. It's just a job you do after you retire, just to give back a little to the community. Do we really think that's going to lead us where? What are those 3 things? Do we really think that's how we're going to get there? So you want to make a leap, and it's that tough thing, especially if you got mouths to feed. Sweetie, I'm going to say goodbye to my wages. This is my time. We got to try this, you know, and that's the big investment. But the first thing you do is ask, if you don't have 10 people in your life that you can ask for $100 so you got the first 1,000 to then plan the fundraiser, to then do your first mailing to get more money. If you don't have 10 friends, who's planning to vote for you? If you don't even have 10 votes and $100 from each of them to begin with, find somebody who you think can make the change you're looking for in the community and run them. Someone who's got 10 friends.
And I've got a good follow-up question, but David's been standing at the mic, so I'll let him go.
Yeah, you mentioned, you hinted at the next level. I'm wondering what sort of calculus goes into deciding whether to run for mayor. As well, that's not a leading question, but this one is. I'm also wondering if you could comment a bit on what your plans are for the future.
From our resident journalist.
So when will it go onto YouTube? Well, I'm not going to be cute about it because too many people are looking for hope right now. So I'm not going to be cute about it. Absolutely, I'm contemplating running for mayor. So what goes into that? Well, one of the things that's kind of odd about the City of Toronto is how you make that decision changes wildly depending on where you're coming from. We don't have a structure that leads you to it. We don't have a coalition party system like Vancouver. We don't have a mirror the state party system like they have in US megacities. And so it is this very odd personal decision. It's almost a handicap if you're making that decision inside the council chamber, because there are 44 people in the hall who every time they go out into the community to a meeting, someone will come up and, oh, that was such a great evening. I hope you run for mayor. Every one of us. Every one of us. And so we're all thinking about it. And the lengthening of the term of office seems to have just lengthened the silly season. The paranoia sets in. It used to set in. You would in the 3-year term, which is my shortest experience. I came into the 3-year world, and you would go away on your Christmas vacation at the end of year 2, and you would come back in New Year's, and everyone seems to have lost their mind. What's going on here? And now it happens like the September before. You don't even get to the end of year 3 for year 4 campaign year. I'm interested to see what happens this time around, because I think what sped it up, kind of the insanity, was when David announced that he wasn't going to run again early in September. All of our heads popped off. It was quite strange. And we were caught off guard as well. And so it was not an attractive time, shall we say. But what should go into it are those same things, but blown up. Do you have 2,500 friends who are ready to give you the $100? Do you have a list of 50 people who are willing to give you the $2,100, which is the maximum at that level? And on and on and on. Do you know enough of the people who are the real experts in campaigning in this city? And the more important question that will be asked this time is, does that even matter? Because it was a whole new crew that got the current mayor elected. So, you know, everybody's saying, will this person work for you? Will that person? I'm thinking, well, they sure didn't choose the mayor last time. So maybe we're at this new juncture where who you know could be the people in this room, could be a whole different crew that are the people that put a mayor in the mayor's office. They'll need to deal with that crazy expert messaging that you all listen to on AM radio before I got here. They'll have to deal with AM radio full stop.
It's called the internet. It's just taking a while.
Yeah.
We do have a bunch of people lined up, so I want to make sure everyone has a chance.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm. It's too high for me. I just wanted to know. I also plan on running in the next election, and what inspired me was similar to you. We've got a really bad councillor who was just working against the needs of the community, and I feel like he was able to do that because we have the lowest voter turnout in the entire city and at every level of election. So how do you change mentality? If you really want to work for your community and you feel like there are some people who are taking advantage of the fact that the majority of people who need to be politically involved are not because they can't afford to, whether it is that they're working 2 jobs or they don't have time, or maybe they're not even inspired to vote because the leadership all looks equally the same, a bunch of about to retire people. But also, how do you change that mentality of what people view a candidate, right? So if you're not a man, if you're not middle age, how do you get them to respect you for your ideas and what you can do, rather than maybe look at you and say, oh, you're a bit too young, maybe you should wait a few more years, you know?
Well, I need to see you in the council chamber. If you're running for an office, you better get down there and be in that room. As if you're finding that room a little too hard to be in, then you have the wrong ambition. If you want it even more, great. Because now you're becoming infused with the language. You are going to sound like that incumbent. If you spend enough time in that council chamber, they're going to throw some baffle gab at you that incumbent is throwing out there at the door, and you're going to have the answer for it. Because you're hanging out in that scene. You're in that council chamber. And sometimes it can seem as boring can be, but slowly you're just by osmosis picking up his or her language. And then your age doesn't matter as much then. Gender doesn't matter as much. But I'll tell you another thing, and this is where I part company with that person who organizes people around voter reform and electoral. This is where I part company with David Meslin, who says, you never want to say to anyone, don't run. But one of the things that needs to happen in communities where voter turnout is poor, communities are diverse, and some of my colleagues are taking advantage of it, is we have to begin to lose that Torontonian aversion to leadership. We have to start early, start now, where it's not even midterm till the end of this year, but to start building some coalition of the people you think are being sort of discouraged from voting, and start to build some sort of coalition around, we should run a candidate. Because if you don't start to build that now, everyone's feeling the same sort of unease you're feeling about your community representative, and in way too small a group, maybe 2 people sitting in a coffee shop, they're saying, you run. Oh, no, you run. Okay, let's both run. There's a YouTube video right now. Type in Rick Mercer and the 7 Million Men. And it talks about the 7 million men and Peggy Nash running for the NDP leadership race. It's hilarious, but it happens in every ward in the city of Toronto every time we have an election. In Thorncliffe, Flemington Park, when Jane Pitfield stepped down to run for mayor, there were 15 candidates. And half of them were really good.
And only one can win.
Only one can win. And the vote went all over the place. And the person who won did not win with the good wishes of the majority of the community. Neither did the mayor, for that matter. Our mayor won with 47% of a 29% turnout. Oh my. You got to raise the turnout, and it can be done. In 2006, John Barber wrote a column that said, if we want to demand that to represent a majority of the community has to elect you, I would be the only councillor sitting in the room. We would have a city council of 1. We set out to get tenants to vote that year. had a great campaign manager. His name's Ryan Merkley. And we set out, we were going to make these tenants vote, had a 51% voter turnout, which is insane at the municipal level, and a plurality of, I think I got 56%, 57%, something like that. So I actually represent the people, and no apologies. But that rarely happens. But it can be done if your whole campaign is designed around, I'm going to make that one thing happen. And that was the thing we did. Just so happens that making that happen also means you'll win, because most of the things I've done in the last 3 years benefit them. But that one goal gives a campaign a singular focus and achieves its goal, because everybody knows that's the goal. That happening in those types of communities changes the entire political landscape of the City of Toronto. No question.
For the good, obviously.
Yeah.
Another question?
Yeah. Hi, sorry. I've got sort of two quick questions. One's kind of nuts and bolts, and one's maybe a little more of a thematic question. The first one is, last year when the mayor kind of, what's the word for it? He just canceled the Transit City plan. I got really upset as an engineer.
He killed it. His words were, is dead.
Yeah.
Transit City is dead.
Yeah, and I'm not. And my question, I guess, is, and I did some canvassing around Karen Stintz's ward just talking door to door, and I found that I do enjoy talking to people on a one-on-one basis, and speaking in public kind of scares me a little bit, but one-on-one is a little bit better. I can handle that a bit better. But I guess one thing that we kind of ran into during the canvassing was, how do you deal with apartments and how do you deal with condos? Like, I noticed that during the provincial campaign, I remember I talked to my property manager, and she said that if a federal or a provincial politician is coming to the door, you have to let them in. But then, obviously, there's no municipal politician. So how does municipal politics deal with
on
condos?
YouTube, am I allowed to say bullshit?
Yeah. Sure. Well, yeah.
It doesn't matter what the level. Right now in my ward, there's a trustee by-election going on. We'll be lucky if 3,000 votes are cast. But all 15 of those candidates, there are 15 candidates running an election, they'll probably pull 3,000 votes. They're allowed in. If you are running for a public office, it's not other levels. And most property management firms don't know this, and they will always push back. So you got to deal with attitude. You're not dealing with a law at that point, you're dealing with attitude. So what you promise them is that I know the rules, I know I'm allowed in here right now, and my promise to you is that you can walk through this building when I'm done and you won't see a single piece of paper on the floor. Don't screw it up for everybody else, please God. Anyone here who's campaigning, whether as the candidate or as the worker, there are door cracks you can shove it through or under, and some of the older high-rises have actual mail slots. We don't need to make a mess of the city to get our point across, but that's what the property management people are balking at. And some candidates are actually disadvantaged in the way they're going to argue about in the House of Commons soon, because property managers don't know the laws. And when you do run through to canvass, little secret, when you get to the door that says superintendent, don't knock on it, don't canvass them, they're just cranky, cranky, cranky people. But you have a right to access to those people. Yeah.
Okay, good. That's
Yeah.
great. I was just curious. I guess my second question is, and I come here as an engineer and as someone who, my profession, we like to tell ourselves, oh, ERTW, engineers rule the world. We're supposed to go school, we're supposed to be awesome. And then when it comes to actually running things, as Tuesday showed, we can't do our job because someone decides they don't like to hear the facts. So I guess as an engineer, my question is, what do you say to get more technical people who can't, I guess, click with the soft stuff? How do you get more of us involved? How do you get more of us engaged in this issue when most of us are used to maybe writing reports or dealing with numbers as opposed to just interacting with people?
Well, and especially I think what you're describing is a similar politicization in which engineers are seeing the decline of evidence-based policy.
Exactly.
And wanting to do something about it.
It's driving me crazy. Like my supervisor is Eric Miller, who knows is the head of the city center. And his thing is, he talks about it's evidence-based decision-making, and then what we're seeing at the municipal level these days is decision-based evidence. You know, where someone says, I have a plan, now you support it, you tell me what the facts I have to, instead of saying, well, what are the facts, how can we provide the best good for the city, and let's make our politics and policies based on that, which shouldn't be a radical idea, but for some reason, it just is.
Well, what's so dangerous about what happened with the firing of Gary Webster is that you can't police evidence-based decision-making, because the whole Municipal Act is designed for staff write evidence-based reports. If council agrees with staff, this set of things happen. If council disagrees, this set of things happens. It's designed for, council must receive the reports. You have to have a report before you to make a decision that actually changes a policy. But you are allowed to disagree with staff and do something else, but you don't ever, you are sunk if you put your public service in the position that they're supposed to write the report to match what they think you want. And I know that it's possible from when I was in on the government side. I know that it's possible to disagree with staff without insisting that they write a report a certain way. And staff can even confer with you before they get to council. But they still have to know that they're in a safe zone where they're allowed to say, I can't put that on paper, sorry. And then the politician just has to decide, okay, do I want to carry on with this without staff supporting my view, and see if I can marshal the votes to disagree with this engineer, or do I just want to drop this one? We had the example is paper cups. You heard us talking about the media endlessly, and yet the report never came to council. We never got to where staff were going to write a report that said it is possible to make a compostable paper cup, and we should just require Tim Hortons and Starbucks and all the rest to create a compostable paper cup and lid. We tried, but the acid test had to be, if you were going to create it, it had to be a cup with a lid that you could put the lid on it, and we could stand on the second floor and drop it over the railing down into the rotunda, and it would stay closed, and such a cup does not exist. So, as an engineer demonstrated for me at about 8 o'clock at night one night with the prototype of said cup, it doesn't work. And he was not prepared to write that you can require this because that cup exists. So all sorts of manufacturers said, oh, if you make a law, we'll do it for you. But it would have been a fiasco because it's not possible. And an engineer was able to tell me that. And he was allowed to stick to his guns. Let your staff stick to their guns. They by and large, if you give them the safe zone and tell them not to be political, won't be political. If you start pushing them to be political, oh my goodness. Now I ask myself today, a week later, what realm am I in? I have two kinds of staff now. I probably have those who phoned personnel the day after Gary was fired and said, what am I worth fired? And they will now be incredibly honest, exceedingly honest. And they will say what they want, and that's kind of a good thing. But I also have this other employee who's now scared witless because he found out this is not a good time for me to retire, and I don't have what I need to live on for a month, and I don't know where else I'd be employable, and what report do I write? They're probably the younger
staff too, who are perhaps
scary.
Yeah, have more of a career involved in the civil service, and so should be thinking long term rather than thinking so reactionary in terms of
the silver lining, though, is that the media has covered this so extensively and so well, in my view. You could actually run for office on, I will never put staff in that position. And that will resonate at every door. I will be wearing my I Heart Gary Webster button in 2014 because it's branded now. It means something far beyond Gary Webster.
I think this is a symbol enough. You know, like we as engineers, we get these iron rings. It's supposed to symbolize this is our duty to the public, not to the politicians, not to the mayor.
Yeah.
Not to any city councillor, to the public.
Yeah.
And that's why I got so upset with this whole fire. Anyways,
Yeah.
So we've got about 15 minutes left. I want to make sure that anyone who would like an opportunity to ask a question does so. So John, since you've already had to go, do you mind keeping your second go short?
Yeah. Okay. I'd like that decision-based evidence, actually. I've never heard that term before. So here's something. In terms of, like, let's say, supporting you when you run for mayor, and I like to give it all. So, I mean, hey, who knows? I could support you. Like, let's say, hypothetically, you need every supporter possible. I'm curious, just to bring it back to Transit City, what your thoughts are. Like, what would your thoughts be on Transit City? I mean, what's your vision, you know? And I'd like to hear that. So.
Well, the transit system is a circulatory system of a city, any city. But certainly it's the circulatory system of the city of Toronto. How well do these fingers do if there's nothing getting to them? What if we cut it off at the wrist? Do you know what the rest is? Do you know what I got left here? Cut the circulation off right here, and what do you have? Jane and Finch. Take the circulation away from here. Malvern. Transit City was finishing the circulatory system of a city and making it a city right out to its limits. That's messaging. Will you take a leap? Will you come with me? Should we create Transit City? What do you say?
And in fact, I think that that's a great answer to the question of the engineer, that it is communications. That I think one of the things you've demonstrated really well today is how communications is, I think, a prerequisite for public office in our era because of the way that messaging is being used by our opponents in such a sabotage, such a destructive way, that we cannot neglect the equivalent in terms of that clear messaging. Next question.
We could build it, just one follow-up for you to say at Tim Hortons. We can build a subway on Shepherd, finish it out the rest of the way. It ends right now in my ward at Don Mills and Shepherd. But today, it's been running for 10 years, and there are any number of buildings that no one ever expected to see along that line now in Shiner's ward and Fillion's ward, more coming in mine. But the ridership projection, even after the 5 40-story buildings that no one ever expected to see in Don Valley but will be in my ward, even after they're done, we're only using 1/3 of the capacity of that subway. We could build 40-story buildings all the way to the zoo. We'll still only be using 1/3 of the capacity of that subway for the next 30 years. If we make light rail, then it's not just Shepherd. Then we can build Finch. Then we can build all the other lines. That's real flow, real blood flowing, coursing through the veins of this city. Yeah.
So first of all, thank you very much. This has been really, really interesting. The focus, for obvious reasons, has been on municipal politics, but I just wanted to actually ask you a little bit about federal and provincial politics. And obviously a lot of what you've talked about today, I'm sure is applicable to the other levels. But I wanted to know, based on things you've observed, people you know, campaigns you've seen, whether there's any sort of material difference in the advice that you would give to someone thinking about the municipal level run versus, provincial or federal run.
Oh, the other orders of government. Briefly, everyone is totally frustrated with them, but nobody's really put their finger on it. It's because they really don't speak to our lives much. They talk about education, they talk about health, but they're way up here talking about it. They're not really clear in any party how it's really going to affect our lives down here. We have to start demanding that they really do speak to that, which means we have to start demanding that they speak to our lives in cities. And all of them, even including the NDP, are just giving it a passing glance. We're an urban nation, and we have to stop settling for the goofy messaging that does go out there. They have to start speaking to us. And so the same thing goes for them. Stephen Harper is a kick-ass messenger. All the rest of us have to get good at it. And they have the infrastructure to do it. They have a party infrastructure and party funding, all 3 of them, although the Liberals don't have as much because it's based on how many seats you have. But they should be spending it on that far much of it is being spent on, they actually have these multi-party trips they go on. The number of both provincial and federal government members that have spent most of what are shrinking party budgets and shrinking government budgets to get in planes to go and learn about garbage in Taipei, even though it's something that environmentally the cities in Canada are far in advance of and are never going to accept, but they're going off to see it because really it's kind of fun to go to Taipei. Spend your money on the kind of kick-ass messaging that the mayor of the biggest city in the country has spent on, and learn how to talk to Canadians.
Just to follow up on that, I agree completely that, you know, the progressive side has lost the messaging war, and you know, you came up with earlier today, what was it? Strong city, broader prosperity.
Stronger city, broader prosperity, better future.
Those are good. But they don't pack the punch of stop the gravy train, right? Which was, true or not, a powerful piece of rhetoric. Is it possible that progressive solutions to our municipal problems do not lend themselves to that kind of simplistic language, that the solutions that we need are too complicated to boil down into that kind of thing? And so we're at kind of, the progressive side is at a loss because we can't come up with these things because they don't really fit what we're standing for, you know? I mean, broader prosperity is good, you know, but it doesn't say what we really need. My wife, for instance, works at the city in Children's Services, and it's incredibly complicated, the daycare issue now with full-day learning and everything. I mean, you can't boil down that issue into something simple. So how do we get around that, dealing with these complex issues in these pithy sound bites? Is it possible?
If we don't know by now in the city of Toronto the simple fact that people don't vote for smart, then that's a lesson that can't be taught anywhere in the world. How many people are running for office or at some point in their lives?
If you may, like, you know, 20% chance, raise your hand.
And how many of you have heard of a man named George Lakoff? Then you'll win. You're gonna win. People don't vote for smart. Little tiny book. If you don't have time to read a big book, and they're very American books, unapologetically. But he has a big, thick books, The Political Mind and the this and the that. But before Barack Obama was running for office, he needed a quick book, and everybody needed to be able to understand the messaging theories and the political theories of this man who has a lot of YouTube videos, but they're not entertaining. He's not real compelling as a speaker. He's a great writer. So he made them a little 125-page summary. It's called Don't Think of an Elephant. You can't listen to Rob Ford without thinking about the gravy train. I'm not going to talk, don't say gravy train today, but say it in everything you say. You can't look at his face without thinking of the gravy train. Yes, yes. That's how he won. He is, that's everything about him. But you just explained what I was talking about. How can we possibly have a stronger city and broader prosperity and a better future if we don't figure out children's services and that horrible morass of funding that it's funded by? Stronger city, broader prosperity, better future. We have to speak that way because people don't vote for smart. They vote emotionally. And we just learned that. And now that we've learned it, let's use it.
Irfan?
Yeah.
I just want to go back really quick to the TTC issue. Because I think when Council kind of voted in favor of reviving a lot of the Transit City Plan, there was a lot kind of this energy that was circulating around, like a lot of the activist communities I'm involved in. Sorry, it's too short for me.
Yeah.
But just like everybody was kind of really on board, and with the firing of Gary Webster, kind of, you know, that energy slumped all of a sudden, and it seems like there's a little bit of confusion about whether, not a little bit, a lot of confusion about what will happen with transit in the city in the future.
So I'm wondering if you can give some advice for us young activists, and in a kind of more political way, ways we can use this to our advantage as potential campaigners in the future. Like, how can we mobilize our communities right now to actually, put those pushes, get the transit, not necessarily Transit City, but the original plan back on track now that Ralph Ford's doing his best to derail it, and how can we, as grassroots activists, kind of use our communities to bring that back?
Don't be deadline oriented. We are seeing sort of the tail end of a campaign that started the day he decided he was going to run for mayor. He's been running against Transit City ever since. Because he kept hearing people say, I don't understand what that is. What is an LRT? It's not a subway. I like subways. Oh, you like subways, and you don't like LRTs. And it snowballed from there. But he didn't have a specific deadline. He just kept building and building and building and building that campaign until he'd actually scared the province out of giving us the thing they'd promised to give us. We sort of came back at him, and so we're in this shaky period now. But activism in Toronto, we have this tendency to go, we have to get everything ready for this meeting. We have to get 1,000 people ready for a rally. I say everywhere, and there's a whole bunch of councillors now saying it with me, because this is how it starts, and I think this is really how the mayor started to build his support. We have a program called Occupy Your Kitchen. I will occupy your kitchen if there are 5 people in it. That doesn't take 60 days, doesn't take 6 months, because we're going to have the biggest rally that ever was. Or we're going to build a coalition, and right after we finish developing our constitution, we'll invite you to speak. No. If you got 5 people in a room, I know 20 councillors. One of us is free that night. We're going to come and occupy your kitchen, and we're going to have these kinds of conversations that you run out of time for. That's actually the campaign that we're up against. If your politics are the same as mine, that's how he got where he got. So let's start there. And every person that you get to have that really deep conversation with becomes another ambassador in this city.
We got time for one last question. Could you mind standing up to the mic so we get it for the record?
I just wanted to concur with what the person said about messaging. Now, you can have really, really great messaging, both and on the left and on the right, I do believe. But the solutions, as one of our colleagues indicated, they aren't simple solutions. In fact, the solutions are often, given funding crises, integrated, forming community hubs with social services, legal services, etc. And people don't generally have the time to listen to those solutions and actually view them and see how they're broken down and sort of what the long-term benefits and that most of these are long-term payoffs of what these solutions are. So I don't know how that, and people don't have time to listen to them. So I don't know how that's going to happen. I'm not saying that it cannot
But do they
happen.
need to? Do they need to hear the whole thing? Too often in the city of Toronto, because we've been very engaged for 170 years, we're a little more engaged than other cities. It took a step back because of amalgamation. It became hard to engage as a whole community. We're still learning that. But we think we have to sit down and engineer the whole thing and make sure that everyone in this room is on board and understands every bit of it before we leave the room tonight. In fact, too often, somebody might come up with okay, yeah, that is a credible way to solve this one issue. Maybe it's the children's services funding crisis or something like that. Okay, he's got a good idea of how to solve it. I'm going to support him for the rest of his life. What more do you know about him? What are his real politics? What is his integrity? What is his background? How do I feel about him? I don't know, but we got a technical plan to go forward on this one thing. But you're going to support everything he ever does and says for the rest of his life? What do you feel about that guy emotionally? If you think about it, that's actually more important. Because if he's an upstanding person and he grabs you and you feel a sense of his honesty and his integrity, or her honesty and integrity, And they do say that they have respect for the truth, and they will get the truth from their public service, versus, I'm going to get on YouTube tonight and promise you that I can cut $1 billion without doing the services of blah, 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 blah. Here's my financial plan, and right down to the last property tax increase. That's not really what made people vote for that guy. They said, well, here's a no-frills, no-nonsense guy. I'll go with that plan. They still made an emotional decision when he was talking details.
On the one hand, I agree, but on the other hand, I think the backstory is a real disintegration of civil society, such that you can't sit down and have a dialogue with your representatives and can't put forward these complex solutions. I think that's the backstory.
You know what's going to happen in the last weekend of March? 4 councillors in New York City are going to sit down and have those real conversations. What they've been doing in Brazil for a decade now is happening in New York City in the last weekend of March. It's a conference that only costs $50 to be at if you know someone you can sleep with in Brooklyn. If you got any relatives down there or any friends down there, go down there and see participatory budgeting, which sounds like, but that's really what it is. Yeah. It's participatory governing, really, because you're talking work plan for the whole year and having those deep conversations. What if somebody was running on that's the way we're going to do it from now on?
Exactly, and and I wholeheartedly agree. I think that has to be done at the same time as finding the solutions, because the people, the reason why there are people like Rob Ford that can spring up is because of that neglect and building up that whole interactive process.
Well, and I think too that this notion of occupying the kitchen, that if you have 5 people, a city council who actually respects that type of interaction, I think that's a great example of something here in Toronto that allows citizens to feel as if they can get involved in the process.
They're great. I love doing it.
Now,
and I'm not alone. I'm not alone. I'm speaking for a large group of councillors when I say that. It's a hoot.
Now, we're almost out of time, but there's one question, call it the Jonathan Goldsby question, that I have to ask. And granted, we could go on and on, so I'm really looking for a relatively short answer. But what impact has Twitter had on the municipal political scene? Because, I mean, it's something, 2 elections ago obviously had no impact. But as really in especially the political climate we have today at City Hall, it strikes me that Twitter is really allowing citizens to get access in a way that they previously have not. So I'm curious both for the big picture sense, but also the personal sense of what the value that you find in using that particular utility.
Do you know what? The times where I feel like I've had the most fun with it, I always call my Twitter personality my downtown personality. I have it up on my Facebook feed, and so my constituents read it. No one who doesn't share my musical taste or something like that is a constituent in the ward has ever said, "I don't want you talking about Arcade Fire." There's never been negative feedback, but they go, sometimes it's not about politics. I'm confused by that, and so I talk about, you want to know more about me, but. What's odd is those are the ones that are the most. And this is why I know that people are crying out for something real about a politician, truth about a politician. A week ago, it was just a week ago, I tweeted at like 11 o'clock at night. I tweeted, because I was, every once in a while you turn on Rogers On Demand and go, what is free on the movie network? What are the free movies? And my BlackBerry was sitting beside me, so I tweeted, dudes, why didn't somebody tell me that I could watch the Weaker Thans documentary for free? I got retweets for 3 days for saying Weaker Thans in a tweet. Yeah. That was a politician actually showing their real self. So I know that people are crying out for that, and I know they're deciding to make leaps with politicians on emotional grounds. I like the Weaker Thans. Sometimes there's lots of politics embedded. I think I know something about her politics now. Okay, I'm going with her. That's how people are making their decisions. And luckily, that usually means something. One time I tweeted, I always wish there was a symbol for musical notes in Twitter. I tweeted and I thought, well, I wonder if anybody will get this. And so I tweeted, they were doing something in social services. So I put out a tweet, it should be in CDR today. And then I put quotation marks, "It is a hard time to be poor," meaning that quote from the Real Static song, which came out just as I was entering politics. That was sort of a Harris sentence, but it felt like that again in Community Development and Recreation Committee. So I tweeted out, it's not really a political statement, but it resonated. And again, a whole bunch of people went, "Oh, I know what she's talking about." And then the next day they were reading coverage of CDR and tweeting me back again. It's a real personal connection. They want it to be personal. You just have to be careful not to cross the line. I'll give you an example of crossing the line, and thank goodness he's not in office. When Gary got fired last week, we all feel really emotional about it. I'll probably break up. You have no idea how just straight arrow great this guy is. And I had fights with him. I was the budget chief. Oh man, we had some fights. But up on the floor, and he always won, damn it. but up on the 7th floor where we were trying to work things out before bringing the budget downstairs to you guys. But David Miller is still tweeting, as I am David Miller, and he tweeted a couple of emotional things about it, but you could see that he was getting madder and madder. He just couldn't get over it. And then he tweeted, "I'll tell you who should be fired." That's where he crossed the line. You know, he may not be in an elected office, but people listen to what he says. He went too personal. If you're far removed from the political scene, not going in and not being outgoing, you could probably rage on Twitter that you'd like to see the person who fired Gary Webster, be the person who gets fired. But David Miller can't say it. I can't say it. And if you're going to run for office one day, I should probably not see that on your Facebook page when I get home.
Well, it's been a real privilege and honor to have you here at the Academy. We've learned a lot today, and certainly from a very selfish perspective. As a communications school, it's important to emphasize how important communications is in politics. And I think you also really made a strong case for the multiple avenues that are available for people to get involved, that there's a lot of ways to become active, and they lead in all sorts of different directions. And I think that it's that engagement that's worth. So if we could all show our gratitude and respect. I would, in closing, of course, invite you all back. Thursday night, we have Denise Balkasoon, who wrote a fascinating article on the Byron Sone case, in which we'll be talking about both the case and the difficulties as a journalist to be able to report on a very important issue with those types of constraints. Next Sunday, this time, is YouTube School. We'll be looking at the role of music in YouTube School and making music videos, perhaps, as part of your campaign to get attention. And then 2 weeks today, we have our first Tory coming to campaign school. Not yet a Tory in office. They have still not shown courage. But we have Bill Fox, who ran Brian Mulroney's campaigns. And Bill has been involved in various campaigns for the Conservative Party. He's a red Tory, which is partly why he has the courage to come. But he actually, in the last federal election, represented the Conservative Party in negotiating the TV debates and the format around the TV debate. So he'll be able to provide a really interesting backroom perspective, and the idea being that he'll be on YouTube and Tories will see that they won't be tarred and feathered if they come to the Academy of the Impossible. And in fact, to quote Senator Pam Wallen, if the Tories ever want to have a seat in Toronto, they must come to the Academy of the Impossible. So, with that said, I thank you all for coming. Mark, our editorial director, on the way out will be offering memberships, which are pay what you can for anyone who'd like to participate, as well as Emily. Feel free to stick around and chat about some of the great issues. But if we could again thank Councillor Carroll for